Sergeant Ellie Carter stood at the edge of the training field, her boots sinking into the wet earth beneath her. The faint scent of rain still lingered in the air, a reminder of the storm that had passed just an hour earlier. A chill ran through her spine, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver, it was the quiet storm brewing inside her. The familiar hum of the world around her, the distant chatter of recruits, the soft commands to her K-9 partner Rex, couldn't drown out the heaviness in her chest. The weight of something unspoken pressed down on her heart. She should have been used to the looks by now. The glances from men who couldn't fathom why a woman like her would choose this life. Or the condescending words that always seemed to follow her as if they couldn't believe that a female sergeant could earn her place among soldiers who, in their eyes, were bigger, stronger, more capable. But today something felt different. It had been building for weeks, ever since she had met those bikers. Those reckless, brash men who thought they knew everything there was to know about strength and courage. They thought they knew what a warrior looked like, and Ellie? She didn't fit the mold. She clenched her fists, the gloves she wore for training biting into her skin. Her fingers trembled slightly, a silent reaction to the raw tension building in her body. She had tried to ignore the taunts, the jokes, the side-eye glances. It wasn't her first time facing the disdain of those who thought her role as a K-9 handler was somehow less important than the jobs her male counterparts had. But it was that moment, when the loud roar of the bikers' engines filled the parking lot like a force of nature, that had shaken her. Their laughter. Their mocking jeers. Their belief that a woman like her didn't belong, that her dog wasn't enough, that she wasn't enough. Her eyes turned to Rex, her faithful German shepherd, sitting quietly beside her as if sensing the depth of her emotions. He was more than just a dog. He was her partner, her closest friend, the one being who understood her without judgment. His amber eyes met hers, filled with loyalty and something else, something that seemed to say, "We've got this. Together." Ellie exhaled slowly, pushing the memories of the mockery aside. She couldn't let them win. Not today. Not ever. She knelt down beside Rex, placing her hand gently on his head. The bond between them was something few could understand, let alone appreciate. Every day they trained together, facing obstacles that tested their minds, their endurance, and their trust in one another. Rex had been with her through some of the toughest battles, both physical and emotional. He was the one who had saved her life more times than she could count, the one who had given her hope when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. But now, more than ever, Ellie needed him. "You ready, boy?" she whispered, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. Rex responded with a soft whine, his tail wagging in quiet anticipation. Ellie smiled, her heart swelling with a bittersweet pride. They don't know us, she thought. They don't know what we've been through. What we've sacrificed. She straightened up, the raw emotion that had threatened to crack her resolve now fueling her determination. Rex stood tall beside her, waiting for the command to move. In that moment, Ellie knew exactly what she had to do. The bikers, those men who had belittled her, had no idea what true strength looked like. And today she would show them. Sergeant Ellie Carter had always been proud of her role as a K-9 handler. She trained for years, endured countless challenges, and built a bond with her military dogs that most people could never understand. Her German shepherd, Leo, was her partner in more ways than one. They were a team, a single unit, working in perfect synchrony to serve their country. Yet, despite all the respect she had earned within her unit, outside of it, things were different. One Saturday afternoon, Ellie and Leo were out on a routine training exercise at a local park. The warm summer air buzzed with life as families picnicked nearby, and joggers passed by. But as Ellie and Leo ran through their drills, a group of bikers revving their engines rolled into the parking lot. They were loud, brash, and covered in tattoos that spoke of rebelliousness and recklessness. Ellie had seen them around before, but she'd never paid them much attention. Today, though, things were different. As Ellie directed Leo through a series of obedience commands, one of the bikers, a burly man with a patch on his jacket that read, "Iron Wolves," slowed his bike near her. "Hey, sweetheart," he sneered, revving the engine just enough to make Leo perk up. "You training that mutt for some street corner? Or are you going to teach him how to bark at a real man?" Ellie's face flushed with heat, but she kept her posture steady, trying not to let the comment rattle her. Leo remained focused, sensing his handler's calm energy. But the biker wasn't finished. He dismounted and took a few steps closer. Can that dog even fight, or is he just some lapdog for you to hide behind? The group of bikers around him snickered loudly. Ellie's heart sank. She had trained Leo in some of the toughest conditions, yet here she was, being mocked by a man who had no understanding of the bond they shared. The biker's laughter echoed in her ears, and though her pride urged her to retaliate, she knew better than to engage. Military discipline ran deep in her veins. With a tight smile, she gave Leo a soft command and led him away, ignoring the cruel jeers that followed her. The mocking continued as she walked back toward her vehicle, her hands trembling just enough for her to notice. It wasn't the first time she had been underestimated as a woman in the military, but something about today felt different. This time it hurt. Ellie couldn't shake the sting of the biker's words. She went home that evening, her mind replaying the scene over and over. Despite her years of service, despite all the grueling training, the missions, and the countless hours spent working side by side with her K9 partner, there was still a lingering question that gnawed at her. Did she belong here? The men around her were often quick to praise her work. Ellie was a damn good K9 handler, they'd say, but even their words couldn't erase the doubts that lingered in her heart. She had earned her place in the unit, she knew that much. But outside of it, she still saw the looks, the subtle glances, the raised eyebrows, the quiet skepticism that followed her wherever she went. They didn't have to say it out loud. She could feel it, the silent judgment that whispered, "She's just a woman." As she sat in her living room, the words of that biker, the one who had called Leo a mutt and a lapdog, replayed in her mind, each repetition more cutting than the last. What was it about her that made people think she wasn't capable? Why did they see a woman and not a soldier? Why did they see Leo as just a dog, a mere tool, when to her he was so much more? He was her partner, her friend, her teammate in every sense of the word. The next morning, Ellie dragged herself out of bed and dressed in her uniform, pushing the previous night's thoughts aside. She needed to move forward. She needed to shake off the sting of the previous day, but it wasn't easy. The weight of the biker's words still lingered in the air around her, clinging to her thoughts like a fog she couldn't escape. At the training facility, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the field as Ellie gathered a group of recruits for their morning training session. She could hear their eager chatter in the distance, their enthusiasm contagious. But as she walked toward them, the gnawing feeling inside her only intensified. The recruits were excited to be learning from a sergeant, a handler, but Ellie couldn't stop thinking about what the bikers had said. Was she doing enough for Leo? Was she pushing him, and herself, hard enough? The recruits were waiting by the obstacle course when she arrived. She had done this 1,000 times, but today it felt different. The weight of doubt pressed heavily on her chest, and she found herself scanning the faces of the recruits, wondering if they were looking at her the way the bikers had, judging, evaluating, seeing her as less than the others. As Ellie began her demonstration, Leo was beside her, as reliable as always. He stood tall, his body poised for whatever challenge came his way, his eyes focused entirely on her. She could feel the connection between them, the quiet understanding that had taken years to build. He was waiting for her next command, ready to take on the world with her by his side. But Ellie couldn't stop her mind from drifting. Leo nudged her gently with his nose, sensing the shift in her mood, trying to pull her from her thoughts. She smiled at him, her fingers brushing the side of his head. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered. "I'm not doing this right, am I?" For a moment, Ellie just stood there, her hand resting on Leo's fur, letting the weight of her doubt settle in. She had spent years honing her skills as a handler, pushing herself to be the best for Leo, for her team. She had always known that being a woman in a male-dominated field would be tough. But she had never expected it to feel this heavy, this personal. Leo shifted his weight and lay down at her feet, his body still and calm, waiting for the next instruction. His eyes were steady, unwavering. He wasn't questioning her abilities. He wasn't doubting her. He never did. Ellie crouched down beside him, brushing a hand through his thick coat. He looked up at her, his eyes full of trust, loyalty, and an unspoken understanding. They were a team. And Leo, more than any person or any comet, had always believed in her. She exhaled a slow breath, pushing the doubts to the back of her mind. No, she thought, standing tall again. I've earned this. I belong here with Leo by my side. And I'm not going to let some jerk on a bike or anyone else make me question that. Leo lifted his head, sensing the shift in her energy, the resolve that was slowly rebuilding inside her. He rose to his feet, ready to follow her lead, and Ellie gave him a firm command. As they moved together, weaving through the obstacles, Ellie's movements were fluid, her commands sharp and confident. Leo followed without hesitation, his body flowing alongside hers like the perfect partner he was. The recruits watched in silence, their faces a mixture of admiration and awe. Ellie could feel their eyes on her, but this time it didn't matter. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. The only thing that mattered was the connection she shared with Leo. As they finished the course, Ellie gave Leo a quiet praise. Good boy. He wagged his tail, clearly pleased, and Ellie couldn't help but smile, her heart swelling with pride. She had done something important here, something that mattered. Not for the recruits. Not for anyone else. But for herself. For Leo. All right, recruits, Ellie called, her voice strong and steady. It's your turn now. Let's see what you've got. She led the group through the drills, each movement purposeful, her focus on Leo and the recruits, not the lingering doubt that had once plagued her mind. The training went on, the sound of commands and the steady rhythm of feet hitting the ground filling the air. Ellie was no longer thinking about the bikers or the comments they had made. She was only thinking about Leo. About the bond they shared. About the strength they had together. In that moment, Ellie made a vow to herself and to Leo. She would never again question her place. She was a soldier, a handler, and a woman who had earned every ounce of respect she had been given. And she would continue to prove it, not with words but with action. With Leo by her side, she was unstoppable. The bikers were back a week later, louder and more obnoxious than before. Ellie could hear the unmistakable rumble of their engines long before they appeared, a deep, throaty sound that reverberated through the training area. She tightened her grip on the leash, her heart rate quickening, the familiar knot of tension forming in her stomach. She knew what was coming. The leader, the one with the Iron Wolves patch, rolled into the lot, his massive motorcycle kicking up dirt as he came to a stop right next to her. He climbed off with exaggerated slowness, his boots thudding heavily against the ground as he approached. His eyes locked onto Ellie, and she could already hear the sneer in his voice before he even spoke. So, what's the mutt's name, huh? He called out, his voice mocking, as loud as the engine still idling behind him. Does he know how to do tricks, or are you just using him to hide behind? The taunt hit her harder than she cared to admit. She kept her chin lifted, the weight of his words sinking deep, but she refused to let it show. Leo, her steadfast partner, was by her side, his head held high, eyes alert, as if he too could sense the challenge in the air. He was more than just a dog. He was family. And no one was going to reduce him to a mutt in her presence. Ellie exhaled slowly, the cool breeze brushing her face, pushing away the thoughts of doubt that still lingered from the previous days. She was done playing by their rules. She squared her shoulders and met the leader's gaze. His name is Leo, she said, her voice calm but firm, and he's not some lapdog. He's a military dog, trained to save lives. He's more than you'll ever understand. The leader's lip curled up in amusement, but his expression hardened when Ellie stood her ground. He had expected her to back down, to get flustered, but she wasn't going to. Not this time. The other bikers gathered around, their laughter echoing as they watched the exchange. They seemed eager for the entertainment, their collective amusement clearly visible as they revved their engines, making the ground shake with their power. But Ellie wasn't intimidated. She had faced bigger challenges than these men. She had fought alongside Leo in situations that most couldn't even comprehend. She wasn't about to let a group of bikers tell her who she was, or what she was capable of. Tell you what, Ellie said, her voice steady, how about a challenge? The leader raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. A challenge? What kind of challenge? Ellie's lips curled into a small smile, a spark of determination in her eyes. You and your crew versus me and Leo. I'll race you. We'll put our skills to the test. If we win, you leave us alone. No more taunts, no more disrespect. But if you win, I'll pack up and leave. Deal? For a long moment there was silence. The bikers exchanged glances, clearly entertained by the idea of this small woman challenging them. They seemed to think it was a joke, a moment to indulge themselves at her expense. The leader's smirk deepened, as if he had already won the mental game. You and your mutt against us? He said with a laugh, shaking his head. All right, sweetheart. You've got yourself a deal. Ellie stood tall, her heart beating louder in her chest than the sound of their engines. She could see the confidence in the leader's eyes, the arrogance, the belief that this would be easy. But Ellie wasn't worried. She had Leo. And Leo was more than capable of anything they threw at him. She gave him a quick command and Leo's body tensed, his eyes trained on her. He was ready. The bond between them was unspoken, but in this moment, Ellie knew without a doubt that Leo would rise to the challenge. All right, Ellie said, addressing the group now, her voice projecting authority. Let's make this a fair race. You can use your bikes and I'll use Leo. No tricks. Just a straight race. From here to the end of the park and back. The leader's eyes flicked to his crew, then back to Ellie. You're on, he said, the grin never leaving his face. As the bikers revved their engines, Ellie gave Leo a final, focused glance. He was alert, his ears pricked, waiting for her next move. Ellie gave a sharp whistle and the race began. The bikers roared down the path, engines growling like a pack of wild animals, kicking up dust as they sped ahead. Ellie's heart raced in her chest, her legs propelling her forward as she ran beside Leo, who was already in stride with her, his paws hitting the ground with purpose. Leo's muscles rippled under his coat as he surged forward, his determination clear. He was built for this. For the hard work, for the trust they had cultivated over years of training. The thought of letting her down wasn't even on his mind. They were a team. Behind her, she could hear the loud noise of the bikes, the roar of the engines chasing her, but it wasn't the sound of the bikes that drove Ellie forward. It was the feeling of Leo at her side, the bond they shared, the unspoken understanding between them. He wasn't just a dog. He was her partner, her friend. And he would do anything for her, just as she would do anything for him. As the bikers reached the halfway point, they looked over their shoulders, laughing at the sight of Ellie and Leo closing in on them. The leader's face turned to one of disbelief, but his grin never wavered. He pushed the throttle harder, urging his bike to go faster. But Ellie and Leo were not to be outdone. They kept their pace, their movements synchronized as they neared the end of the path. Leo's breathing was steady, controlled. Ellie could feel the power in his legs, the energy surging through him as they approached the final stretch. With a final burst of speed, Leo lunged ahead, his body cutting through the air like a force of nature. Ellie's legs burned, but she pushed through, heart pounding in her chest, determined to win this, not just for herself but for Leo, for their team, and for every person who had ever underestimated them. The bikers were still ahead, but only by a few meters. As they neared the finish line, Ellie could hear the motorcycles beginning to falter. Their engines sputtered slightly, as if the weight of their arrogance was finally catching up with them. And then, with a final leap, Leo surged past the leader, crossing the finish line just seconds before the bikes. Ellie's breath caught in her chest as she reached the end of the race, Leo stopping beside her, panting with pride. The bikers came to a screeching halt, the leader staring in shock at the sight of Ellie and Leo, who stood tall, side by side and victorious. The race was set up in minutes. The bikers revved their engines and lined up their motorcycles at one end of the park, the rumble of their machines vibrating through the air. Ellie positioned herself and Leo at the other end, just beyond the starting line, and she could feel the electricity in the air, the tension that built not just from the challenge but from the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Leo stood beside her, muscles tense, his gaze fixed on the far horizon. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of his breath, and Ellie could feel the deep, unspoken connection between them. She knew this wasn't just about speed, it wasn't even about the race. This was about pride. For her, for Leo, for everything they had worked for. It was about proving once and for all that they deserved respect, not just as a woman and her dog but as a team, a force to be reckoned with. Ellie whispered into Leo's ear, her voice soft but filled with resolve. We've got this, boy. She felt him respond, his body vibrating with anticipation, the steady beat of his heart echoing in hers. She had been underestimated too many times, and today, Leo would help her teach the world that she, and he, were more than worthy of their place. The bikers revved their engines one final time, the sound of the growling motors filling the air. They were all grinning, eager for what they thought would be an easy win. They had no idea what they were up against. Ellie took a deep breath, focusing her mind. This wasn't just about beating them. It was about making them understand. It was about showing them that true strength came not from the roar of a machine, but from the unbreakable bond between a woman and her dog. With a sharp whistle, Ellie signaled the start of the race. The bikers surged ahead, their engines howling like beasts let loose. Ellie could see the dust kicking up around them, their bikes thundering across the park. But she didn't flinch. She didn't have to. Leo was with her. And Leo was faster. The heavy motorcycles struggled to maintain their speed, their riders attempting to balance the weight and power of the bikes beneath them. But Ellie and Leo were in perfect harmony. She could feel him beneath her, his every muscle coordinated, every movement precise. There was no hesitation in Leo's steps. He was built for this. As the bikers fought to maintain control, Ellie and Leo glided across the park. The wind whipped past them, but they were fluid, almost weightless. Each step Leo took was a promise, that they belonged here, that they were not to be underestimated. The bikers turned their heads in disbelief as Leo and Ellie swiftly closed the distance between them. There was a shift in the energy, a palpable moment when the bikers realized they were no longer in the lead. Their machines roared, but they couldn't keep up with the quiet, relentless speed of Leo. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest, but there was no fear in her. There was only focus, pure, unwavering focus. Leo's stride was flawless, as if every step he took was part of an intricate, well-rehearsed dance that they had practiced over countless hours together. As they approached the final stretch, Ellie could feel Leo gather his strength. He surged forward, faster than before, leaving the bikers in the dust. Their laughter and jeers turned to shock as the distance between them and Ellie closed rapidly. Leo's powerful legs pushed him forward, and with a final burst of speed, he leaped ahead, crossing the finish line in one swift motion. The bikers' engines sputtered behind them, the riders struggling to control their machines as they neared the end. But it was too late. Leo had crossed the line, his paws hitting the ground with a soft thud just moments before the bikes could reach him. Ellie slowed to a stop beside Leo, her breath coming in short bursts as she looked back at the bikers. The sounds of their motorcycles seemed distant now, fading into the background as Ellie focused on her partner. Leo stood tall, panting but proud, his tail wagging ever so slightly. The bikers pulled up to the finish line, their faces a mixture of disbelief and frustration. The leader was the first to remove his helmet, his eyes wide as he glanced from Leo to Ellie. He was out of breath, his body covered in sweat, and for the first time since this whole ordeal started, he was speechless. The other bikers followed suit, their expressions darkening as they processed the loss. Ellie didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her victory was clear, not just in the race but in the message she had sent. She turned to the leader, her voice calm and steady, though there was a fierce pride beneath it. "I hope you've learned something today," she said. "This isn't a game. Leo and I have worked harder than you'll ever understand. We've earned every ounce of respect we get." The leader opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. He looked down at Leo, his gaze lingering on the dog for a moment before shifting to Ellie. There was something in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. It wasn't arrogance or ridicule. It was something closer to respect. Not just for Leo but for Ellie as well. He nodded slowly. "You've earned it," he muttered, and there was no mockery in his voice this time, only acknowledgement. Ellie didn't reply. She didn't need to. The lesson had been taught, loud and clear. As the bikers began to disperse, their engines sputtering into life, Ellie looked down at Leo, her hand resting lightly on his back. He looked up at her, his eyes full of quiet understanding, as if he knew exactly what this moment meant for both of them. It wasn't just a victory. It was a statement. It was proof that no matter how hard they were pushed, no matter how much the world tried to tear them down, they would rise. Together. The bikers pulled their bikes to a stop, the sound of the engines slowly dying away, leaving only the sound of their heavy breathing and the distant hum of the park. There was an uncomfortable silence as they gathered themselves, the dust from the race still settling in the air. The leader, the man who had mocked Ellie the most, dismounted his bike slowly, his face flushed with both exhaustion and a reluctant sense of respect. Ellie stood tall, her eyes steady as Leo stood beside her, his head held high, his coat slightly ruffled from the run. He was calm now, but Ellie could feel the pride in his muscles, the same pride that was swelling in her chest. The leader approached her, his gait unsteady but determined. He paused a few feet from Ellie, his eyes searching hers as if trying to find the right words. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. I didn't think you had it in you," the leader said, his voice low, almost hesitant. The arrogance was gone now, replaced by something else, something that Ellie hadn't expected: sincerity. You and your dog. You're not just hiding behind him. You're a team. We were wrong. Ellie looked at him, her heart still pounding from the race, but her mind clear. She knew this moment was important, not for her but for Leo. This was the transformation she had been hoping for. It wasn't about winning the race, it was about winning their respect and, perhaps more importantly, changing their perception. Ellie nodded, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It's not about what you think of me, she said softly, meeting his gaze with a quiet but unyielding strength. It's about what I know I can do with Leo by my side. The leader looked at her for a long moment, his eyes flickering between her and Leo. There was a shift in him, something intangible but profound. The mocking tone that had been so easy for him to wield was gone, replaced by a begrudging understanding. The other bikers stood behind their leader, their faces unreadable, but their postures were different now, more relaxed, less brash. They had witnessed something real today. They had seen a woman and a dog work together, not as a novelty but as a force, an unstoppable team. As they began to mount their bikes, the leader gave Ellie a final lingering look. I'll tell the guys, he began, his voice gruff but sincere, don't mess with a woman and her dog again. We learned that the hard way. Ellie didn't say anything in reply. She didn't need to. The lesson had been learned and it was enough. She watched as the group of bikers revved their engines one last time, their faces no longer filled with mockery but with respect. They were leaving, not just the park but the arrogance that had defined them. They had been humbled by the quiet strength of a woman and her dog. As the bikers disappeared down the road, Ellie felt a strange weight lift from her shoulders. The mocking, the insults, the doubts, all of it was gone. What remained was a quiet sense of triumph but also something deeper, something more meaningful. Leo nuzzled her side, his nose pressing gently against her hand. Ellie looked down at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. He had been her strength when she doubted herself. He had been the partner she needed when the world seemed to question her every move. You did it, boy, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Leo wagged his tail, the slight sound of it swishing through the air a soft testament to their bond. Ellie stood there for a moment longer, watching the bikers fade into the distance, the last traces of their arrogance lost on the wind. There would always be more battles to fight, more doubts to overcome, but for now, in this moment, she felt a peace she hadn't known in a long time. In her heart, she knew that Leo had taught her something that no race could ever prove. Strength wasn't about size, power, or dominance. It wasn't about showing the world what you could do. Strength, true strength, came from something far deeper. It came from trust, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and her dog. As Ellie turned and began walking back to her car, Leo by her side, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The mockery had been silenced, the doubts had been erased. The respect she had fought for was no longer something she had to prove. It was something she had earned, with her heart and with Leo's loyalty. And in the quiet after the storm, Ellie knew one thing for certain. No matter what anyone else thought, she and Leo were a team. And together they could face anything.